Hello, everyone. It's 1 minute past the hour, so I suggest we kick it off and we'll continue to let people in as and when they arrive. Welcome to today's webinar. We are very happy to have you with us today. I think some people are probably not muted, so before we get going, may I ask everyone to mute themselves when you're not speaking or asking questions? If not, I think we have a bit of an echo. Right, so my name is Erica Blankhart, Senior Public Affairs Manager and Head of Sustainability at Invest Europe, and I will be your host for today's webinar towards harmonized ESG reporting. With the 2025 data collection and reporting season in full swing, we believe this webinar is perfectly timed to walk you through the 2024 Invest Europe ESG reporting template and provide a live Q&A session to offer and ensure clarity and support your reporting efforts. The webinar will begin with a general introduction to the template and a deep dive into its structure, exploring the different components and categories. Following the introduction, we will move into a panel discussion where LPs will share their experiences and perspectives on how they are approaching ESG reporting. We will address key questions like, how are they as LPs using the template? Why are they using the template? What are the benefits? How are they approaching data collection and reporting? And how are they using the data with their GPs? As always, we will also have a dedicated Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. Now, whether you're here to learn, to ask questions, or to share your own experiences, your participation is what makes these sessions so valuable. So we encourage you to actively engage by asking questions and sharing your thoughts in the chat box. It's a great opportunity to interact directly with our expert speakers and to gain valuable insights that can strengthen your approach to ESG reporting. Now it's high time to welcome our speakers. I will introduce them alphabetically. So I'll start with Amara Goere. She's Sustainability Director, Private Equity at Schroders Capital Management, and she's also the Vice Chair of Invest Europe's ESG Committee. We have Dr. Björn, Product Stakeholder and Sustainability Manager at KfW Capital. And last but not least, we are pleased to have with us Caroline Maurice-Buchanan, Head of Unit Equity Eligibility Services at the European Investment Fund. It's an absolute pleasure to have all of you with us today, and we truly appreciate your valuable time and expertise. So with that, let's get started. I'll start sharing my screen to start introducing you to the Invest Europe ESG reporting template. So the reporting template that was published in November last year was actually already the third edition of the reporting template. The first template was published in 2022 and was mainly for Invest Europe members only. The second edition was then issued in 2023, making it more suitable for scaling purposes. In 2024, last year, the template went through a second round of review. This revision was undertaken in very close cooperation with VentureESG and a range of leading LPs from across Europe, including the European Investment Fund, KfW Capital, AP6, TACI, Enterprise Ireland, and Invest NL, as well as Invest Europe's own dedicated task force, of which Amara was a member. Now, what was the purpose of last year's review? The review had two main goals. First of all, to increase proportionality for the smaller end of the market and to enhance alignment with EU legislation and other industry initiatives. More specifically, the template was updated to increase tailoring by incorporating a new component for small portfolio companies and adopting a more proportionate staged approach, which we will get to in a few minutes, across minimum, recommended, and full. It was updated to optimize alignment with EU ESG reporting legislation like the SFDR and the PAIs, the Principal Adverse Impact Indicators, the CSRD and accompanying ESRS, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. It was updated to ensure continued alignment with existing industry initiatives like ESG VC and the EDCI, to provide further clarification and ensure consistency in definitions and interpretations, to enhance simplification and user-friendliness, and last but not least, to fine-tune the nomenclature and improve machine readability to facilitate interoperability. I think important to bear in mind as a starting point is that this is a voluntary template. There is no obligation on Invest Europe members or private equity and venture capital investors more broadly to use this template. Members and non-members can use it at their discretion, and Invest Europe is not involved in the underlying data collection, data flow, or investor reporting. However, while the template is not compulsory, use of the template is heavily encouraged if we want to move towards the much needed harmonization and convergence of ESG investor reporting across the private equity and venture capital industry. Because the very purpose of this template is to address the continuing divergence in investor reporting requirements and questionnaires. We realize at Invest Europe that we will never be able to come up with one fixed template that people will commit to for the full 100%, i.e. a template that everyone will stick to without any deviation. We will always need to allow for some flexibility and for some room for maneuver for a variety of reasons. One of them being investors also need to comply with their own national legislation, including specific local ESG reporting requirements that may not be relevant or material enough to include in a pan-European template. Another possible reason is that some investors may invest in a particular type of funds, for example, environment-focused funds, and may wish to add specific environment-related metrics. The simple need to take account of materiality, for example, based on sector. Metrics which are material for portfolio companies, for example, in the healthcare sector, may not necessarily be material for portfolio companies in the ICT or agriculture sector. However, if we can already agree on a common baseline covering or representing 85 or 90% of the metrics that are common and overlap across various investor questionnaires, legislation, or initiatives, that would already be a major step forward. Ultimately, the main benefit of a unified investor reporting process is the time and resources it frees up for practitioners, including GPs, LPs, and portfolio companies, to focus on effectively integrating material ESG factors into their processes and fostering long-term value creation. In addition, the template contributes to increasing comparability and can help practitioners to identify, manage, and address material ESG risks and opportunities. Now, what can you find in the Invest Europe 2024 reporting template? First of all, yes.
If I may just, there is a comment. Are you able to increase the size of this, of what you are displaying? It seems it's a bit small for some. Oh, is that better? Yeah, if we get any more comments, I will let you know. But
okay, thank you, Caroline.
Bigger.
As I'm sharing my screen, it's difficult to actually monitor all of the comments. So perfect.
Of course,
thank you very much.
Thank you.
So what can you find in Invest Europe template? To start with, 3 sheets covering metrics at portfolio company level. Minimum, recommended, and full, with accompanying thresholds. So the minimum portfolio company template is directed at those portfolio companies with fewer than 15 FTEs. The recommended portfolio company template is targeted at portfolio companies with between 15 and 250 FTEs, 250 being the threshold that you can also find in the EU SME definition. And then the full portfolio company template, which is targeted at portfolio companies with more than 250 FTEs. Then you have one sheet enabling you to aggregate all the portfolio company information at fund level. This is primarily for those investors who prefer to receive information at fund level rather than on a portfolio company by portfolio company basis. Then you have one additional sheet including fund specific metrics, and you have one sheet including GP specific metrics. In the 2023 template, this used to be one sheet, but you actually decided to split that up to make a better kind of distinction between metrics which are very specific for funds and metrics which are more specific and more appropriate for GPs. Then you have a whole range of guidance sheets, including more information on the definitions on the portfolio company metrics, definitions on of the fund metrics, and definitions of the GP metrics, sources, which includes an overview of where all of the metrics are coming from, and then an additional sheet giving further insights on possible ESG-related policies. I think it's important to bear in mind that each metric and each definition which is included in this template finds its origin in an existing questionnaire, an existing initiative, industry initiative like ESGVC or EDCI, and it is in standard framework or regulation like the SFDR to avoid divergence and to ensure optimal alignment. We have aimed to make the template as user-friendly as possible without turning it into a tick-the-box exercise, including multiple choice answers, including drop-downs, etc. People can always leave and should feel free to leave cells blank if they are not monitoring or collecting data on a specific KPI. Compared to the 2023 template, we have also simplified the template, for example, by removing a lot of the sub-questions, grouping some questions, and focusing really on those indicators that LPs need. You will see, especially in the recommended and the full, and I will scroll down a little bit, I will again increase the size, that you also have separate SFDR sections. You can find them here. The SFDR sections are entirely optional and do not form part of the actual reporting recommendations. However, considering that some, if not many LPs also report on PAI, on Principal Adverse Impact Indicators under the SFDR, the template offers the possibility to gather raw data on the PAIs. Please note, though, that this raw data is not enough to ensure SFDR compliance when it comes to PAI reporting, because for many PAIs, additional information, for example, financial information, is needed or additional calculations are needed to get to the required SFDR PAI information. I will take a look here at the full portfolio company template. You will see that there's also a specific reference, a specific coding, a specific nomenclature. If as a GP or as an LP, you would like to add certain metrics for whatever reason, because of materiality, as we discussed before, or because those metrics are very specific and important for a specific sector, it's important to respect and to follow the logic of the accompanying nomenclature. So, for example, if you would like to add one here, you can then name it 0.1.14 and so on. If you look at the full portfolio company template, you can each time see, which metrics also appear in the minimum and in the recommended template. So I think for now, I'll focus on the full one because that one is the most comprehensive, but you will see the same structure in the minimum and the recommended as well. We each time start with kind of a general category. So before moving into the ESG, we start with a general around, company fundamentals. For example, the name of your company, kind of the country where it operates, the industry classification, revenues, balance sheet turnover. Not all of them you will see in the 3 sheets, but of course for the full, we have gone for all of them, not least to ensure alignment with, for example, the EU SME definition, which is looking at the different metrics. Then we have a general kind of category, so to say, of sustainability management. This is actually an example of the metrics that we decided to group in the 2024 template, whereas in the 2023 one, we had an individual metric, for each and every policy. In the 2024 version, we decided to group everything together and just to ask okay, which are the sustainability rated policies that you have in place? And then actually you can then indicate here which ones that you have as a company. When you go over each and every metric, you will also see the underlying definition and how some of those need to be interpreted, when completing and filling in the questionnaire. So this is sustainability management around policies and the persons responsible. Then ESG incidents. This is one that you will see across the 3 sheets as well. Then we move into the regulatory requirements. So we look at the EU taxonomy. We look at Paris-aligned benchmarks, and we look, of course, as well at ESG regulatory reporting under the CSRD. Then we move into the specific kind of ESG aspects. So for environment, we have environmental management. We have, of course, greenhouse gas emissions. Also here and across the template, ensuring alignment with other frameworks. And this is actually a very good example. If you go to the right, then you can actually see how each of the metrics then relate to other existing frameworks. We realize that these are not all ESG reporting frameworks or legislations. There's also kind of, for example, the GP ESG due diligence questionnaire of Invest Europe, which actually felt it was important to make the comparison with those as well. So we have the SFDR PAIs, we have the CSRD and the ESRS, we have the ESG VC framework, we have the EDCI, we have the ESG Convergence Initiative for European Life Science VCs, we have our own GP ESG due diligence questionnaire, and then we have the European Data Cooperative for research purposes. So you will see that overview for each and every metric. So going down back to the environmental metrics, so we have environmental management, we have the greenhouse gas emissions, we have climate change strategy. Again, here, these are the three metrics that you will also find in the EDCI, and also the definitions are fully aligned. We have energy management, we have water and waste management, then we have biodiversity. Moving then to the social, we have DE&I metrics, which are actually very extensive. New in the 2024 template compared to the 2023 template is basically the move beyond male and female, but you will also find now for each diversity metric, we have 4 categories. We have male, female, we have non-binary, and we have other, for example, for those people who prefer not to disclose gender. So we have that for FTEs, C-suite, employees, for founders, etc. We have pay equality, we have employment. This is actually an example of a category where we deliberately chose to break down the metrics into individual components, basically to allow users to work with the numbers more flexibly, calculating averages, percentages, and other necessary figures. Moving down, we have an employee engagement, then we have skill development, we have health and safety, we have human rights. Then we move into the governance section. So then we have the composition of the board, again, making a distinction between male, female, non-binary, and other. And then we have data security and customer privacy. Aggregated portfolio company level, I will not spend too much time on this. It's basically the same as this one, but then enabling you to aggregate this at fund level, and each time indicating here whether the metric appears in the minimum, in the recommended, and or the full template. Then we have the additional fund level sheet with very fund-specific metrics, again starting with a general category around the fund fundamentals, some of the legal and policy-related metrics when it comes to the fund, whether the fund is taking or adopting any ESG-related improvement measures, the regulatory requirements, not to forget, of course, the SFDR, whether this is a fund categorized or classified as Article 6, 8, or 9, or whether the fund is not in scope of the SFDR at all, with then some of the requirements that come with that. And then we have, of course, also some DEI metrics at fund level. Then we have the GP-specific sheet, again, starting with general. As a GP, whether you are having any external engagement with other standards or frameworks, again, making it as user-friendly as possible by using this tick the box kind of option without, of course, again, turning this too much into a tick the box exercise. We realize actually, and you will see that across different sheets, that by basically listing all of the different options kind of separately, row by row, the template inherently and evidently, becomes a lot longer, but we actually think it's much more user-friendly like this, especially if you then want to aggregate afterwards. Then at GP level, we then also, of course, have an environmental bucket, looking at environmental management and impact, including greenhouse gas emissions. And then again, we have the DE&I metrics at GP level. And then we have the definitions. I'm not going to spend too much time on those. Here you have policies. This is just to give you an indication if you're wondering, like, okay, especially as a portfolio company, I'm not quite sure what would be covered by each of those policies. Then here you have an indication of, what could be a possible scope, what could be possible components, possible targets, and then a possible time frame. So for example, here, an anti-discrimination and equal opportunities policy, what could that cover? What could be different components? What are possible targets? And what are possible timelines? So this is very much basically aimed to serve as an inspiration more than anything else. And then we have the definitions at fund level, definitions at GP level, and then we have the sources. So I'll bring us back to the start, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, so Erika. Just to let you know, there are a couple of questions that you might want to answer in this presentation that might be helpful for the participants.
Let me check in the chat.
So there is, does the aggregated PC sheet fills it up automatically, for instance?
No. That we haven't been able to do in the Excel file. The lines, the rows are completely aligned, which means that if you have it for one portfolio company, you should be able to copy and paste it into the aggregated fund level sheet, but it doesn't happen automatically. Maybe there is a functionality in Excel that enables you to do that, but as InvestEurope, as we don't know for each and every GP, for each and every fund, how many portfolio companies there would be, it was very difficult for us to kind of integrate that underlying functionality to make sure that it happens automatically. But there may be a way of getting that done, I think, individually for each GP or for each fund. But from our side, we haven't been able to do that.
There's another question that you might be able to address. Are all types of PAIs in the sheet?
In the sheet, we have focused primarily on the first category of pies. I mean, you have 3 buckets of pies. You have the first kind of category of mandatory pies. Then you have, kind of the voluntary pies where you can, from which you can pick and choose. In the template, we have focused primarily on the first bucket, the first category of mandatory PAIs. But again, the PAI section, it is of course part of the template because it's there, but they're not a formal part of the actual reporting recommendations. It's there primarily for those GPs and LPs who are reporting PAIs under the SFDR and therefore need the information from the underlying portfolio companies. But for those who are not reporting on the SFDR, there is absolutely no obligation, even though there's no obligation overall because it's not a compulsory template, but there is no kind of obligation to complete the full SFDR section. It's really only for those who are indeed reporting PAIs under the SFDR.
And maybe a last question for you. When reporting back to InvestEurope, should we also include new indicators we have added?
I mean, as InvestEurope, there is no expectation. So as GPs and LPs, when you're downloading the template from the InvestEurope website, there is no expectation or no obligation for anyone to report back to InvestEurope kind of what you have done. We are not involved in any of the underlying data collection, in any of the underlying controlling, in any of the underlying reporting. We don't see the data that is being collected, but we do have kind of a commitment or an ambition to review the template on an annual basis, or at least to review to make sure that it's still up to date, that it's still aligned, and with current market practices, and it takes into account evolving kind of developments, whether it's in the industry or whether it is kind of from a regulatory perspective. So with that in mind, if you are making changes to the template and actually think that it's something that you can see across the industry that is very common, please, of course, feel free to share that with us, because then we can integrate it into our thinking for basically this year's review, because it's already 2025. The idea, of course, is not to do a massive overhaul of the template year after year and to redo it kind of entirely year after year, because if not, it's going to be very difficult, I think, to create kind of a kind of a historical data set and to be able to compare year on year. But of course, we do want to review it every year to make sure that it remains aligned with, as I said, current market practices and any developments, whether that is within the industry or any developments when it comes to the regulatory framework like SFDR, the EU taxonomy, CSRD, and the ESRS.
Thanks,
Any
Erika.
other questions, Caroline, that you picked up now, or shall we just move maybe into the panel discussion, and then we can continue to look at the questions when they come in. Maybe
Good
one
idea.
thing I should mention before we go to the panel discussion. The template that you find on the Invest Europe website, it's an Excel template. It's a simple Excel file in close cooperation with a selection of reporting software providers, and VentureESG. I'm not sure whether Johannes is here today. We have developed a machine readable format of the template to ensure and enhance compatibility and to facilitate data exchange between reporting platforms. I think the MRF is ready. In the meantime, I know discussions are ongoing between reporting providers to implement that. So for sure, we'll keep you updated on that. Björn, I don't want to throw you under the bus, but I know you've been heavily involved in this process. Is there anything you would like to share at this stage?
I also already can share that there is a Notion page set up for the providers with all the details regarding the machine readable format. Maybe to give a bit of a background, what is the aim with this machine readable format? Of course, we all know handling like 1000 spreadsheets in Excel is not that nicely, especially working in a space where most of us are invested in tech companies. So of course, there are many ESG data tool providers that are working, helping in this data collection process, but we want that data can flow frictionless between these data providers, making it as easy as possible for all GPs to get data for one and the other LP flowing between such data providers. And this is the aim of the machine readable format, making it as easy as possible to have the data transferred from one to another place.
Thank you, Björn. I can see Nala, you've raised your hand. Does that mean you would like to intervene at this stage?
Hi, Erika. First of all, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I have a question. I understood from your presentation that it's not a compulsory format. However, I have a question about the portfolio companies which would be established in a country which does not have any alignment with EU legislation, like no CSRD requirements and stuff like that. But those portfolio companies are still implementing some good practices related to ESG. Should this kind of portfolio companies and funds fill in the template?
Good question. Thank you very much, Nana. I think that the template offers a comparison, an overview of how it is aligned with EU legislation, like the CSRD and the ESRS, like the SFDR. There is an SFDR section, which, as I said, is primarily targeted at those GPs and LPs who are themselves reporting PAIs under the SFDR. However, I think what you find in the minimum, the recommended, and the full, and the metrics that you can find there have actually been chosen regardless, so to say, of SFDR or regardless of CSRD and the ESRS. Those are the metrics, and we have spent hours and hours, with a range of LPs, kind of going through each of the metrics. Those are actually the metrics which LPs find material and important to get information on through the GPs from the underlying portfolio companies, and which are considered kind of material regardless of the sector, and which are considered critical for all portfolio companies. We have, of course, made a distinction, kind of minimum, recommended, and full, depending on the size, because we realize that a small portfolio company with fewer than 15 FTEs does not have the same resources as a very large portfolio company with more than 250 FTEs. But I think the metrics have been identified, have been agreed on in very close consultation and cooperation with the LPs and the GPs that we have been working with, regardless of the SFDR and the CSRD. So I think whether the portfolio company is located in a country, may not be maybe a non-EU country where CSRD has not been implemented, or where SFDR has not been implemented, I guess it may not be that relevant, because the metrics have been chosen of course, bearing in mind, in the back of our minds, SFDR and CSRD, but they're not meant to be, the template is not meant to be kind of a compliance template, right? It's not because you fill in the template that you will be able to comply, in full with CSRD, for example. So I think it's part of the bigger framework, and it's one of the building stones. But it won't enable you in any case to comply with CSRD. So I think whether the country is in a CSRD aligned or compliant country, I think this is really more focusing on, okay, what are investors' needs, what are investors' expectations, and what are the kind of metrics on which they would like to get information from the GPs and the portfolio companies. I can see one of the comments here about the template, of course, being not voluntary, not mandatory, but still being requested by LPs. It is not mandatory in the sense that, as an association, for example, any members of Invest Europe, whether you are already a member or you decide to become a member, you need to follow, for example, as an obligation, our code of conduct, right? I mean, there's no way to get out of that. When I say that this template is not mandatory, I mean that by being an Invest Europe member, there is no obligation on you to use the template. However, I mean, the reason why we built this was to address the divergence in the industry, to address the multitude of different investor questionnaires that members are receiving, and actually to strive to an alignment and a convergence there. So indeed, the purpose is for the template to be adopted more and more by both GPs and LPs, to reduce ultimately the reporting burden, and ultimately to get to this level of harmonization that we are striving for, and that is actually much needed. So, I mean, the voluntary versus mandatory, of course, LPs will be requesting it, but that's ultimately the purpose of this, right? That more and more LPs and more GPs sign up to the template, so that there's that the multitude and the diversity that we currently have in investor reporting questionnaires goes down, and ultimately over time diminishes so much that you actually get everyone reporting based on the same template. Again, as I mentioned before, allowing for some flexibility, right? We are very well aware that some LPs and GPs may be adding some metrics, whether it's based on the sector, whether it's based on materiality. But if with this template we can cover 85 to 90% of the common baseline, that would already be a huge step forward when it comes to the ultimate aim of achieving harmonization and conversions. I can see more and more questions coming in. Sorry.
Yeah, maybe Erica, this is a supernatural transition to the panel, right? Because I think that's also where we as LPs were going to share why we think you should use it. And my answer, at least, was going to cover also some of what Nana and some of the questions also in the chat are addressing, of why should you consider it regardless of regulatory requirements and so forth.
Right. Good. Thanks, Amara. I was planning to do the same. So indeed, question then to the panel, right? I'm not sure who wants to start first, Amara, Caroline, Björn, but it would be helpful, I think, especially for all of the GPs on the call, to explain, like, okay, how are you using, the template? Why are you using it? What are the benefits of using the template? And then I think one of the questions that, a lot of GPs have is, what are you doing with that data, right? How are you using this ESG data that you're collecting from your GPs? Are you using it to make investment decisions? Are you using it to monitor developments? So I think those are all very valid questions. I think we can group together. Amara, I can see you're unmuted, so or you're still unmuted. Maybe you want to go first then.
Sure. So for us, and this really comes to the point that was just raised, as an LP that has LPs, we're really, from a reporting perspective, we're really coming at it from the perspective of trying to collect data on what our LPs need. Those are often pension funds, insurance companies, as well as collecting data that we actually think add value from a value creation perspective. So that also should help you create more value on your portfolio companies. We're super supportive of the fact that the ESG data convergence was created. I think that's a really great start if you've never done anything, because it's industry agnostic. It's just a small set of KPIs, right? However, from our point of view, the next step is to go a little bit wider with regards to KPIs that are standard or unique, so material to the business models of the portfolio companies. Also thinking a bit more on the policy side, which EDCI is not doing, and the Invest Europe template is, like code of conduct and what things should be covered in that code of conduct. To then thinking ahead with regards to the increasing demand for regulatory related data, such as the PIs, for example. So for us, and also of course the EU taxonomy, for us, the ESG reporting template is basically what we always in engagement with our GPs recommend, because it's a great starting point. You don't have to do the full set, but we can indicate where to start. So for example, right now, we're about to get set up with an external party that is going to help us with our data collection. I have the kickoff tomorrow, and I'm actually going to tell them, implement the ESG reporting template from Invest Europe. These are the set of about 8-9 KPIs we really have to get data on, because we have our commitments in our SFDR 8 and 9 pre-contractual disclosures, but we also strongly encourage that they start collecting the other ones. And from our perspective, this is really the most complete template. It's helpful as an Excel if you don't have the resources yet to do it digitally. It is being implemented in more and more software tools, something we also highly encourage. And I think that is also how all of you should look at it. So maybe you don't collect all of them for all your portfolio companies. Maybe you do start with something related to EDCI, and maybe one or two that you find really important, or that you know others will find important, like code of conduct. But it's really great that it has that Excel template, that it is being automated, and eventually also a template that can be machine read should your LPs be using a software tool.
Björn, you want to go next?
Thanks a lot, Amara. Totally emphasizing all the points you're making. Maybe adding from the state-owned perspective in this area, of course, as a subsidiary of KfW Group, we have to adhere to lots of regulatory requirements, and also for us, CSRD, EU taxonomy, SFDR are very, very important aspects why we are doing these exercises. Nevertheless, for us as sustainability team of KfW Capital, it's also that we are convinced that you have to measure what you are trying to manage. And for us, of course, we have a strong focus regarding ESG management during our DD process. We are trying to capture all the ESG capabilities of the funds we want to invest in. Nevertheless, when the commitment is done, ESG doesn't end. And of course, we want to have a look into our portfolio. What are the aspects that are already working quite well, maybe also giving best practices back to the market with case studies or something like this, but also to identify those aspects where there is a way to improvement throughout the next few years. And this is where we want to engage with our GPs and to enhance and improve the overall capabilities of ESG in the market. Of course, this leads us to our first ESG report, which we were able to publish last year, but of course also in discussions with our GPs, maybe also regarding an information for the next DD. That's also an aspect why we are doing these exercises. It's not only to just fill out some Excel sheets that the LPs of Schroders or our KfW group are happy and that's it, but we want to do something with the data we're collecting. This is also why we got through the template throughout our reviewing process line by line. it was important for us to discover those aspects, those KPIs that really matter, and then all decided together that those have to be included, and that those KPIs which are not that important for us were removed. And this is why we are doing this and where we got throughout the reviewing process. Happy to hand over to you, Caroline.
Well, thanks a lot, Amara and Björn. I fully concur with everything you've said. And perhaps to emphasize, indeed, also the monitoring part of this ESG reporting, why it's important for EIF. Currently, you know that the state funding commission, European Commission funding, everything is under tight control. And one of the main focus of EIF mandate, because we have mandate that grant us money so that they can invest into your funds. Ultimately, they want to know what we did with the money, right? This is public money, ultimately, and it's very helpful to be able to show, to have indicators that indeed the money is invested into real companies that have a life, and that we are able to bring certain KPIs to their attention to reassure her and show that indeed it has an effect on the ground. So this, I would say, is beyond the specific aspect of ESG. It's very important, and I can only emphasize it. Then, to be more specific, we, of course, it's important for EIF that other institutional investors and other investors are aligned with the report. We are co-investing with many different market players, and we would like to simplify and make your life easy. I saw in the chat many questions about reporting. Indeed, in case you are using a platform, feel free to use the machine readable template that EIF will accept. Also, indeed, we consider the reporting as mandatory, and please use the Invest Europe template. We will communicate, if not already, you should have received it, or you will receive in the next couple of hours, and I say hour, maybe day or until Friday, the relevant file with all the relevant information for you to report. If you have a specific case and you would like to reach out to us, I will post in the chat, and maybe if we do FAQ, the relevant address to which you can contact us, so feel free. But indeed, it's an important point for us, and for, let's say, future development, in addition, of course, to all the internal sustainability reporting that the EIB group has to perform.
Johannes, I can see that you've been contributing to the chat. I mean, Johannes from VentureESG. There are quite a few questions about the MRF, right, and how it then works with other kind of reporting platforms, software platforms. I think it's fair to say that, of course, you and your colleagues at VentureESG have been taking the lead on preparing this MRF. Of course, we as Invest Europe have been involved as well, but I think the lead has been with you. Are there any other kind of insights, functionalities, practicalities that you can share with people now to address, some of the questions that have been raised?
Yeah, absolutely. Perhaps very quickly handing over to Oliver to explain the process.
Hi, Oliver. Now I see you both. Yes. Hi.
As actually arranged and discussed recently with some of the platforms and KfW Capital. So we've already tried to iron this out as much as possible, because obviously this is the first time. This is a wider process, and there will be some issues, but hopefully there's some answers. So perhaps Oliver briefly.
Yeah, exactly. So essentially, the machine readable format is a CSV file. So it's a standardized export from the platforms that can then, the export can be standardized, and then the import can be standardized into different platforms. So the idea is that we've made lots of platforms aware that both of the Invest Europe template, but also the machine readable format version of it. And we're in communications with them in terms of implementing import and export functionality. Essentially, the way that data transfer actually happens is GP or portfolio company needs data from platform A into platform B. They already have data in platform A in the Invest Europe template. They can export a file, they hold that file, they download the file to their computer, and then they import it into platform B, which is to fulfill a different reporting requirement according to the same Invest Europe template. And because it's this standard file, that is then able to be recognized by platform B. Obviously, the quality of both the generation of those files and import of those files is something which needs to be checked. And so that's something which we're working separately with the platforms with. And once we verify that they're able to do it properly, then we'll maintain a list on the Invest Europe website of supported platforms which have both the Invest Europe template has been approved in terms of how they've implemented that on a conceptual level on their website, on their platform, but also then if they've then taken that one step further to be able to generate and export and import the machine readable files, that they do that compliantly. And then we're also working with them working with the platforms and have laid out a kind of dispute resolution process if there's any issues in that data transfer process. But the idea is that as much as possible, it's automated.
And we have not officially released a machine readable template. You can find it on our website, but we are going to actually release a version of the process that Oliver described as soon as possible. And in parallel with Erica and her team will review the platforms if you want. But really, we've worked with most of the ones that we know from the ecosystem are being used at the moment. So unless you're using eFront, there should be a reasonably good integration going forward as quickly as possible.
I think, if anyone is uncertain about, I mean, it's a very long list, right, Johannes and Oliver? If there are any platforms, that you would like us to get in touch with, whether I mean, as Invest Europe, let me start there. As Invest Europe, as a pan-European association, we aim to remain neutral and objective, right? Very often we get questions from members saying, okay, we have now prepared a short list of 5 service providers, who would you recommend us to work with? We would never go down that route, and we would never kind of recommend or advise or give positive advice on one service provider over another. That said, conversations are going with the selection of service providers, and those providers who will have implemented the Invest Europe template will, of course, then be shown on the Invest Europe website, because ultimately, the more service providers implement the template, the better, of course, it is, and the easier it is for people who are, of course, using such a provider, the easier it will be, and, the more it will enhance the interoperability and the compatibility between the different platforms, right? But so if you are working with a specific provider and you're really keen to make sure that they have implemented the template, for example, through the MRF that Johannes and Oliver have been talking about, feel free to get in touch, right? And then either we can then confirm, yes, they are on the list, we are having conversations with them, or in case not, we can always reach out to them, right? Because of course the idea is to be as comprehensive as possible and to cover as many providers as possible, but without, as I said, recommending one over the other. So I can see, for example, Caroline also questions about, so the EIF EIB template is that it's the same as the Invest Europe one, right? And the MRF that Johannes and Oliver have been talking about is the same as the Excel file that you will find on the Invest Europe website. It's just a different format to make it easier for integration into softwares and reporting platforms. But it is basically exactly the same.
And maybe to specify, because I see a lot of questions and I will answer them individually. It's a bit difficult not to answer as we're speaking. Sure. So EIF has used the Excel file from Invest Europe and has kept the consolidated company tab. And we have inserted for you, for all the relevant funds invested by EIF, we have inserted the name of the companies and the name of the fund as we know them, so that it will ease out your life and our life to reconcile. So either you decide to fill in that template, or you decide to fill in the machine readable, only to use the same name that we have communicated to you. And I will put that in writing, so then it's clearer, hopefully. Any question, you can also reach out to us. I will leave the contact details. But indeed, it's the same template. We do not have any other template for now. And indeed, an ESG platform is on the list. As you may know, EIF is an institutional, is a European institution. The procurement takes time. So it is in the pipeline, but not completed yet, just to let you know.
Yeah. So, for example, Oliver, Johannes, there's question: when a GP has filled in VentureESG template, can this one be exported as a machine-readable file, the CSV format, to another GP who is using it to import it at its ESG provider? And I can see both of you.
Yes, exactly. provided that it's filled in on a platform which can export the CSV file. It's important to note that not all platforms will do that, because for some platforms it just won't be relevant. It won't only be relevant to one client, so they won't put the dedication in to do that, in which case you'd have to transfer the data manually. But for clients which are large enough and have enough clients which is relevant for, they will enable this export and import process, and it will just be one file.
And there seems to be some confusion around here. I think Nick there's a couple of people speaking about why isn't Invest Europe, why isn't EIF just using Atlas? The whole point is that all of you on the GP level and on the LP level can use whatever platform you want. For whatever reason, you might land on this platform or this platform. The point is that it shouldn't matter. This should be totally agnostic. If you decide Happy Day is better for you, or Novata is better for you, the point of doing these exercises, they should speak to each other, my non-technical brain says.
Exactly.
Right? So no LP needs, the LPs do not need to align on the platforms. That's exactly the point. The LPs have aligned on the content of the platforms, and that's the key, right? So that the software layer needs to be coordinated, and this is not going to be solved this year. There will be glitches and there will be problems. But I think going forward, this will not be an additional barrier.
Yeah, thanks, Johannes. Anna, you raise your hand. You would like to chip in? And we'll continue to go through the chat, right? But Anna, go for it.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the session. It's very, very clear. There's just one thing that I really want to make sure I understand. For GPs invested by the EIF, this template is mandatory. This is what we're going to use.
Indeed, yes. And if you have not received yet the toolkit, you will receive it in the next hours, meaning until Friday.
Okay.
And I think the advantage actually, Anna, so ultimately the purpose is that an increasing number of LPs and GPs sign up to this, right? So then that would mean that, I don't know, in so many years, it will, of course, the EIF has started from this year, right? And I think already last year, Caroline, we were already very largely aligned. We'll be using the Invest Europe template for their ESG reporting purposes, but more and more LPs will be using that. So the idea is that over time, you don't get 50 or 60 different investor questionnaires from each of your LPs, but basically the vast majority of them are then using the Invest Europe template. So you only need to kind of complete it once. Again, with the caveat that some LPs may be asking for some specific, for example, when you're based in Finland or you're based in France, you may have some, because for example, the France Invest, the French association, I know they added a couple of metrics, for example, from a French perspective to the Invest Europe template. We will always need to allow for that, right? But the idea is that if an increasing number of LPs sign up to this, that you over time no longer get a multitude of different investor questionnaires, but you actually get one, or 85% of it is aligned across your LPs, with just allowing for some flexibility. That's where we want to get to, right?
Okay.
Yeah,
very clear. Thank you.
Yeah, I also saw a question around benchmarking, right? Whether as Invest Europe or anyone else, we would be producing benchmarks based on the data. The reporting template as it currently stands, and which is currently available on the Invest Europe website, is there for members and non-members to download and to use at their convenience. As I said, as Invest Europe, we're not involved in the underlying data collection. We're not involved in the underlying investor reporting or the data flow. And we're not in charge of controlling the data, which is different from other initiatives where you're basically submitting your data to a third-party provider, to a consultancy, and then they're working their magic on the data. The template does not serve that purpose. The template is there for investor reporting. That said, and I'm going to start sharing my screen again, if I can make it
Is Erika frozen? It looks like it.
I fear so too.
Yeah. That's the downfall that comes with using Microsoft Teams. I thought that when logging onto this call.
Is anyone else maybe in the meantime able to answer some of the pending questions? Because there's still quite a few.
So I can say one word about benchmarking. And I think, Björn, you've already addressed one of them, just one sentence. I think what we're expecting to see and what comes from the conversations we've been having with LPs is that there will be some benchmarking being done by LPs, which in brackets only really becomes meaningful once you've got 2, 3, 4 years of data, right? Everyone is going to ask for this very quickly, but it doesn't really make an awful lot of sense to benchmark on very bad 1 year of data. We're going to start thinking through with some academics. We've already spoken to people at LBS and at Imperial to actually pull together a data set across LPs. Dear LPs, we're coming for you soon with a proposal, because there's people who have done this in the public markets and in private equity, and they're willing to do this for free in this ecosystem, because I think there's a lot of impact to be had with this. But again, this will take a moment. So please, nobody put too much pressure on either the poor LPs or anyone else. Otherwise, you just get bad answers. Bad questions will lead to bad answers. So don't ask too many bad questions right now. It'll take a moment.
And maybe to add to that also, and obviously we're here promoting also the ESG reporting template for Invest Europe, but if you do follow that, it's a very low barrier to also sign up for the ESG data convergence initiative and submit those KPIs there so you can get a benchmark. But yeah, otherwise I second what Johannes said, and maybe that also answer one of the other questions on the chat with regards to data quality and so forth. I mean, I think we have to accept that we need to start somewhere and that we have to start reporting it. I'm also looking maybe at Caroline and Björn, wondering if they're planning to do some studies off of the back of this data that will help the rest of the industry. Then knowing that that's very much overweighted to VC, and I'm, for example, more invested in buyout. And yeah, the use of the softwares. And in an ideal world, something I'm personally very keen on promoting is that all the providers, I mean, the data right now for all of us, it might still be seen as a competitive advantage, but essentially it's not. In the end, the competitive advantage will come with what we can do with the data. So we need to get that information up, right? We need to be able to see what we can do with it from a value creation perspective. So this is also my call to any of the software providers to be open, to let your systems talk to each other, because right now it's so resource consuming, so demotivating for so many good, relatively junior sustainability people in our teams to have to work on this because systems don't communicate. And I think therefore the whole coding of the template and so forth is already a huge advantage. The adoption of the template by the software is a huge advantage, but we need to all continue pushing towards that transparency so that we can all in our own tools even start creating benchmarks to the extent possible.
Agreeing 100% with you, Amara. As we had our first exercise regarding ESG reporting 2 years ago, data quality was that poor that we even weren't able to analyze almost anything. This was the main reason why we chose to work with a data tool provider with Atlas Metrics, and definitely saw for the second year improvement regarding data quality, but also there we are on a journey which is by far not over yet, and definitely will see improvement throughout the next years, also making it much easier to derive any conclusions out of the data.
Yes, and to complement, fully agree, and to complement, I remember having this discussion with an expert, not on small and medium enterprises. So somebody was used to ESG reporting of large cap, and the answer was already for data quality. you can only do basically comparison from one year to another. Of course, you can use outliers, you can use many different methods. Nevertheless, we need to accept that there might be data gap in the first instance, and then that the data quality will slowly improve with time. So to be patient, it's always what I say. We need to be patient. We are structuring a new process slowly all together. And now the alignment indeed with the Invest Europe template is helping to shape this, that we're all going in the same direction at the same time with the same tools. So this is a great step indeed to ease out the task.
Exactly. Maybe then to answer also the question Thibaut just put in the chat with regards to it evolving. I mean, maybe speaking on at least behalf of the ESG committee at Invest Europe, we've had so many discussions around this. And I think the goal is not to make this bigger year on year, but really to just improve the usability and, if needed, anticipate further regulatory needs, but otherwise try to keep it more stable because everyone has more benefit from that, especially to this topic of being able to have year-on-year comparisons. Do we wait for Erica because we're past the hour? It stopped recording.
No, I think she's
I think Erica said she can't get back in, right?
Aha.
Okay.
Okay.
So perhaps it's up to you to close off.
I see Erica is back now. I've tried to put her back, but I don't know if it will work. Hello, Erica again.
Hey, you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, but you don't seem to be able to see me.
We hear you.
Is that
We can
correct?
hear you.
Okay. Sorry about that. I was kicked out, and for whatever reason, I was not allowed back in. I'm not sure whether anyone responded to the question on the benchmarks in the meantime. Yes. Okay. Right. Any other questions that we should be dealing with at this stage, or have you reached the end of the webinar in my absence, which of course would be fine?
There is still some, Erica, but they're quite technical with regards to the template, so maybe those people can write Invest Europe afterwards to answer them, because I think they're a bit more unique to certain situations, at least based on my judgment, but I maybe others disagree.
I just see maybe one question that might be of interest to all. It's about the upcoming changes that we could anticipate. So do you think the template will continue to evolve? Any change make it difficult to monitor progress and also pose technical challenges? So this we fully agree. And then maybe, Erica, we had discussed earlier the anticipated changes in the regulation with the omnibus of the Commission. Maybe you want to say a word about that?
I mean, at the risk of repeating something that has already been said, right? I mean, and I mentioned that before, maybe very briefly on the template, whether it will continue to evolve. I think yes, right? But as I mentioned before, the idea is not to do a massive overhaul each year. The idea is to basically continue to tweak it and to update it as and when needed, taking into account any developments that may happen either within current market practice, taking into account changes to other initiatives like ESG VC or the EDCI, is taking into account any changes to SFDR and the PAIs, right? SFDR is up for review this year. We're expecting a proposal from the European Commission either at the end of June or early July, or even after the summer. I think it's at the start of the year. I think June was kind of the target date. In the meantime, I think they're aiming for Q2, Q3, so to be seen. On the Omnibus Simplification Package, I think originally that was anticipated to be launched on the 26th of February, so later this month. But in the meantime, there are kind of reports emerging that launch of the Omnibus Simplification Package may be delayed into early March. So basically, to be seen when that comes. We know that the Omnibus Simplification Package in principle will not cover SFDR, but will focus primarily on CSRD, CS3D, and the EU taxonomy. But it remains to be seen kind of what changes the Omnibus Simplification Package will bring and how it will amend basically the existing kind of EU ESG reporting requirements, whether there will be a delay, for example, to the application of CSRD or CS3D, to what extent they will simplify the rules. All of that remains to be seen. We had a meeting with the European Commission last week, and at that stage, I think they were not in a position to share a lot of insights. So basically, to be monitored and to be to be followed very, very closely. We, from our side, are preparing a letter to the European Commission, setting out our concerns, our thoughts, and our considerations on the omnibus package, which we're hoping to send either toward the end of this week or early next. I realize we've gone a bit over time, but I would like Caroline, Amara, Björn, whether maybe we can close the webinar. I think that would be a nice way of closing it. Are there any kind of practical steps, any actionable insights, any tips and tricks, that you can basically give, right, to the people who are still on the call? I can see, there's still a lot of people here. So any practical steps that you can suggest, that you can recommend, and that people can take to improve ESG reporting across the board, or maybe suggestions for how, maybe collaboration, cooperation can work better to make ESG reporting even more effective and even more efficient. So maybe just, 1 or 2 minutes of kind of practical takeaways, I think would be nice. Björn, you're unmuted, so that kind of, for me at least, is an indication that I'll come to you first.
Happy to start with that. First of all, we can definitely say to everyone, be prepared and get familiar with the questions and tools as early as possible. We see very big differences in our portfolio with those who start early and those who don't look at the whole thing until shortly before the deadline. So that's definitely the first thing to keep in mind. The second aspect is definitely to critically scrutinize answers and data quality at the first level of input. The more aggregated and condensed the data set becomes for us as LPs, the more difficult it is for us to identify incorrect or unclean answers. So regarding data quality, that's definitely another hint. To maybe finalize your questions regarding collaboration between us and GPs and other stakeholders, I think, again, standardization and alignment is key between all of us. It's definitely a thing that especially we as LPs don't ask almost the same questions. We have to ask the same questions with the same answer possibilities and so on and so forth. And we should not only align regarding questions, but also regarding technical requirements, regarding deadlines, regarding definitions. So first of all, Invest Europe as a template is a big step. And of course, the machine readable format is the next big step regarding technical requirements and data flow between LPs, GPs, and so on and so forth. And to finalize, we all should each and every time prove whether the asked questions are all necessarily and not only asked because it might be interesting to have those in the sheet. We should ask the things that really are important to us and will matter regarding our portfolio management and measurement.
And I think maybe to jump in here, Björn, I think that I agree with what you're saying, right? But I think on the last point, that has been, I think, the main starting point for, definitely, I should say, last year's review in the meantime, right? I think, as you say, we went through the 2023 template line by line, row by row, metric by metric, for the recommended, the minimum, and the full, each time asking ourselves with all of the people in the room, like, okay, do we really need data? What do we need it for? Is this really what we want to ask, right? So I think that is exactly the starting point, as I said, on which we have been working, right? Like, okay, what is really needed and what is considered to be material from investors, from an investor perspective, regardless of whether you comply with SFDR, CSRD, whether you're in a country that transposes CSRD, regardless of the sector that you're in, what are the metrics which are really key as an investor to get information on. So just, I think, to stress that has actually been, one of the key considerations that we have had in our minds, throughout the entire review exercise, which has taken quite a number of months. Amara, you want to go next?
Yeah, although I think I also actually second a lot of what Björn said, but maybe to also play a little bit here, but ask questions of your LPs when you do think that something isn't material. I mean, we might say we have to get this for XYZ reason, even if, so for example, carbon footprint, right? We mostly invest in kind of capital light businesses. So for many of our portfolio companies, it's not financially material. They don't have a huge impact on climate change. However, we and our LPs need to report that data. For us, it's material data to have that on our portfolio, to have our financed emissions. So you'll have to think about that if you have LPs that care about that, but challenge us. I mean, we also are sometimes still figuring it out. Our LPs, everyone is still trying to understand what is going on. So definitely with the ones that you're closer to, ask questions, because that's the only way that we'll all start understanding what we're doing here and get a good data quality aside from quantity.
Thanks, Amara. And Caroline, I'll come to you in a second. I think one of the considerations we also had was actually to encourage portfolio companies, regardless of their size, to start thinking about their metrics, right? About the ESG metrics at the start of the growth journey, so to say, right? So some metrics are there just to encourage portfolio companies to think about something which may not necessarily be material right now for the specific portfolio company, but it's important to start thinking about it ahead of the growth curve, you know, that the portfolio company is going to go through, right? So, for example, on DE&I, of course, when you're a very small portfolio company, it may not be, you know, that's relevant when you're only 5 or 6, but it's important to start considering that and to start taking it into account, you know, as you grow, right? Because then some of those metrics will become even more important. About circularity, I think is one good example. I mean, there's a lot of focus also at EU level on the need for a circular economy. So we also felt it was important kind of to start thinking about it for portfolio companies to trigger their thinking on, you know, circularity of measures and processes. Caroline, the floor is yours.
I concur fully with the advice given by Björn and Amara, and I would add a very simple advice to read the definitions, because a lot of care and attention has been given to these definitions, also to ease out the task, to align them with other corporate sustainability reporting metrics. So hopefully, if you have already doing one or the other, you can reuse many. And then it should also help you to understand exactly what you need to include. And so the definition have taken a lot of time, I think, to Erika and all involved. So do use them, because they are very nicely done and will guide you effectively.
Thanks, everyone. I mean, we've gone, I think, almost 15 minutes over the top of the hour. So I suggest we wrap up here. As we do that, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to our speakers, Caroline, Amara, Björn, Johannes, Oliver. Thank you very much for chipping in, for sharing your time, your expertise, and valuable insights with us today. A big thank you as well to all the attendees for your engagement, your thoughtful questions. As I mentioned at the start of the webinar, your participation is exactly what makes these sessions so valuable. So we encourage you to stay connected, to continue the conversation, whether by sharing your thoughts, reaching out with any follow-up questions, or joining us for future discussions. As I said, the template will be going through another round of review later this year. If you see any change in market practice, if there are any things you would like us to take into account, never hesitate to get in touch. We're here to listen and to consider any observations you may have. So thank you very much once again for your time and for your commitment, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. And maybe just to close, my apologies for the technical hiccup. It never happens actually, so it's just, you know, bad luck, right, that it happens in the middle of the webinar. So my apologies for that, but you were in the best of hands with our speakers. So I'm sure it all went well when I was not there. So thank you very much again. Have a great rest of the day. Have a great evening. And we look forward to seeing you again, either online at one of our next webinars or hopefully in person, you know, at one of our events. Thanks again, and have a great afternoon. Bye, everyone.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.